Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Lauren Allison again with the MasterTheBody.com podcast. And today I wanted to pass on some information, concepts about something that's very important to me. I get a lot of questions about why I push breathing so much. The reason why I do that is because the breathing is a massively important part of your health, your happiness, and your strength, literally. And so I'll begin with the idea of importance. So a lot of people that come to the clinic here are looking for nutritional counseling or something that addresses very specific issues with respect to either fatigue, food sensitivities, allergies, digestive problems, hormone problems, physical pain, and so forth. Now, I came upon breathing concepts a very long time ago. Well, it seems like very long ago. So I've been following breathing techniques and concepts for probably about 29 years. And after practicing for that amount of time across different disciplinary concepts like pranayamic concepts, all the way to what's notable now, something like Wim Hof's technique, which is a fantastic technique, and it has the clinical data behind it, that you start to see commonalities among things. And certainly among patients at the clinic, we see issues with respect to how their breathing pattern affects their overall health, their attitude, and I think even their ability to absorb certain nutrients. So with that being said, I'd like to do a short talk on why we talk about breathing so much here in the clinic and why I am constantly recommending breathing exercises to people, because it can make that big of a difference. If you think about, they generally say that a person can survive close to a month with no food. And this is a generality, obviously. Different people, different states of health and nutrition, that is going to vary. The second concept is a person can survive maybe 3 days without water. Now, obviously there's a big rift between 30 days of no food and 3 days of no water. The interesting thing about that is the emphasis right now in culture particularly, and I'm in the United States for those of you who are not aware of that, diet is very, very important to people. A lot of people catching on, which is fantastic. I mean, it really needs to have the attention. But when you think about consuming something that physically you could actually do without for an extended period of time, I'm not saying a person lives well if they are not eating for close to a month, but the fact that it can be maintained for that length of time tells you just how dependent the physical body is on that type of sustenance. So then the next one in line would be the water. If a person can survive 3 days without water, again, probably not going to be feeling too fantastic, but the fact that they can do without for approximately 3 days tells you that the body still, again, is, relatively speaking, not as dependent on that as it is on the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide. So straight medical appearance is that when a person is kept from oxygen for more than 5 minutes, that they are very, very likely brain damaged and heading very quickly towards death. And at certainly 10 minutes without death would be the byproduct. Now, most people can't have cessation of breathing for more than a minute, minute and a half without feeling an immediate urge to want to breathe, and it becomes almost a panic. So if you think that you can go 30 days without food, possibly, or you could go 3 days without water, but you can only go probably up to 3 minutes, and that's doing breathing exercises to maintain that time without oxygen, that is a very, very significant change. Even if you only went from 3 minutes to 3 days, that is an enormous gap. And so we begin to see that the emphasis on diet and water is very important, absolutely. But we need a greater emphasis on breathing. This is very almost, we don't want to say trite because there's a lot of talk about breathing at this point. And I don't want to underestimate, people say breathe, and that means, breathe through your abdomen and this will help you relax. And yes, it does actually help you relax. But the idea that the gas exchange in the respiratory tract is not happening at the rate that it needs to happen because people are restricting their breathing. They're stressed. They hold themselves in postures that restrict their breathing, primarily because the mind gets in the way. And we are not thinking about what were typically considered involuntary actions, meaning the lungs will breathe for you without any intervention from your conscious mind. But we also do have the ability to consciously control it. And we have come to a point in time in history when it will become extremely important that we do start to exercise conscious control over it. And the reason for that, with all of the restriction on the breathing that we're doing, we're creating problems. We're creating issues with our moods. We're creating issues with our nutrition, just from the fact that we're not breathing as well as we should be. Now, there is clinical data for this, and it is starting to grow rapidly. And the importance of the breathing, it becomes apparent to anyone who's willing to practice breathing even for a minute or two, where they notice that they feel different, or if they're very shallow breathers, then they'll notice all of a sudden they get lightheaded as soon as they start doing any type of deep breathing pattern, because the brain is not used to getting the oxygen at that level. And so it causes a slight schism between the state that the person was in and now this flood of oxygen to the brain. So from that standpoint, the more oxygen a person can get into their tissue, I'm not talking about causing an extreme imbalance between oxygen and carbon dioxide, but the fact that we can handle so much more oxygen than we are allowing ourselves to have is causing a significant problem with our health in general. And people, everything from blood pressure. In fact, there's a device out called a Respirate that helps people with their blood pressure. It is purely a breathing rhythm apparatus. So it listens to feedback from the person's respiration cycle and then pings them with tones as to when to breathe in and when to breathe out, because it's affecting their nervous system, which is having an impact on the vasoconstriction in their vascular system. So I don't want to get too deep into that, because we now are finding that breathing affects so many different things. The main thing I wanted to impart is that breathing exercises are many, and there are lots of different concepts out there and lots of different exercises out there. A lot of them, if not all of them, derived from either old yogic breathing exercises or Tibetan breathing exercises that were refined to a very strong degree early on. Now, things have changed in terms of culture and timing and where we are in history, and so some of those breathing techniques may not be appropriate for every person. In my opinion, breathing techniques are like fingerprints, and they are very individual. And when you look at someone's breathing pattern and you can sense where they're at, both in stress and when they're relaxed, you start to get a sense of, and they can get a sense of, if they train themselves to pay attention, what kind of person they are when they're breathing at certain times and in certain ways. And so once they become aware of that, then they can consciously alter the breathing pattern to make them feel more empowered or more empathetic or more confident. This is very clear when people start applying it. They start to see these changes and how dramatic it can be and in how short a period of time. So from everything from energy generation to changing the person's mood. Now, most people think breathing, and they've had these ideas planted in their head about, they have to breathe through their nose and they have to breathe through their abdomen. And again, there's a lot of validity to that. But there's also a lot of validity at this point to just breathing in a way that might seem almost too aggressive to people, like something along the lines of Wim Hof's technique, where he's not concerned at all about where you're breathing through. As he would say, it doesn't matter what hole you breathe through as long as you get it in. And he has the research to back up the technique. And of course, there has been research on breathing techniques and all these different effects that occur, and they're all valid. So people need to become experts at their own breathing pattern and understanding the way that they use their breathing to reinforce whatever state they are in at the time. And once you become aware of that, you can very quickly alter your breathing pattern to get you from one state to another. Early on, I studied from a very, very interesting man, Jack Schwartz, out on the west coast of the United States. And this is where my very, very first introduction to unique breathing patterns and patterns that can change your dominant brainwave state, which can be the difference between anxiety and total relaxation. And those states can be changed with a rhythm in the breathing, meaning a certain pattern of inhaling for a certain amount of time, holding it in for a certain amount of time, exhaling for a period of time, and holding it out for a period of time. And those are within seconds of each other. And we have some examples of that on masterthebody.com, the different breathing patterns that can influence dominant brainwave that is going on, which has a direct influence on your perception of your environment at any given time. These are very, very powerful techniques, and we have taught them to many, many people in the clinic over the years. And we find that some of the issues are, it's not something you take, it's something you control, albeit that it would be, you would think, something that people would gravitate towards very quickly because it's something they can do within their control, and it has very, very profound effects. But because of that, and we are not taught to put a lot of attention onto our internal workings, and so we are more reactive versus controlling our state. And one of my missions is to change that in the world so that people begin to see that they have much, much more control over their physiology than they have been taught or led to believe. Because these breathing patterns, if you look back at the concept we were talking about earlier, which is that within a few minutes of the cycle of your breathing being stopped, you become panicked because your body and your nervous system are saying, I don't have enough oxygen to continue functioning. When that happens, you notice an immediate change in your state. Now, when you are not breathing fully, but you're breathing a little bit, which is a state that a lot of people are in, then they're kind of just in this meandering state where they kind of drag themselves through the day. They don't really have a lot of energy per se, but they're not really sure what to do about it. And it is true that there may be some issue with thyroid, adrenal, or some other endocrine problem. But what we know from the research, interestingly enough, that has started with Wim Hof is that it changes certain neurotransmitter outputs, which can be directly linked to something like depression or anxiety. Now, you can piece this information together with the research that's already been done, but the fact of the matter is that you can affect your state very dramatically. And I'm not just talking about mood, but energy levels, feeling of the way that you're digesting, purely by influencing your breathing pattern. Like I said, there's a number of examples of that on the website. One of the things that I think people need to realize is that this is the main thing that they are going to be able to use to control their physiology into the future. It is immediately noticeable once you begin to do it. So I'll go through one of the simplest techniques, which is inhaling for a count of 4, holding it in for a count of 4, exhaling for a count of 4, and holding it out for a count of 4. So typically all someone has to do is to repeat that cycle for a minute or two to notice simple change in the way that they feel or their perception. Now, if you're breathing shallowly to begin with, this may seem like a huge jump in your state within a few minutes. You just have to pay attention to how you are doing and how you feel with a pattern this simple to be able to tell you from what point you were starting. So you inhale for a count of 4, 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000. Hold it in, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000. Let it out, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000. Hold it out, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4, 1,000. And then start again by breathing back in. And you repeat that sequence for the total sequence is 16 seconds. So you'd only repeat the sequence roughly. It'll take a little more than a minute to repeat that sequence 4 times. If you do that to 2 to 3 minutes, then all of a sudden you're going to notice a shift in your state. Now, there is a way to follow that up and continue to expand upon it with additional exercises. That would be almost like a warm-up. But for some people, if they're shallow breathers normally, that has pretty profound effects in itself. So it's more of an introduction as to a general breathing pattern or a rhythm, because with breathing, the rhythms can have a significant impact. But it's a whole nother world when you learn to control your breathing and your breathing needs from moment to moment, because there may be times when you need to exhale and hold it out for a few seconds versus exhaling and holding it in for a few seconds, based on how much regulation you've been giving the breathing over the course of a day. So you really start to learn a lot about your physiology and the way that you are feeling from moment to moment, and then implementing some type of breathing control to change the state that you're in if it feels like you are out of balance. You become very, very in touch with this. And of course, once you're doing that, now you are exerting direct influence over your health and your physiology. So you can visit masterthebody.com. We have more information about that. Helping people or mentoring people with breathing is one of the things that I have been absolutely adamant about over the years. And we get very, very dramatic results with it, because beyond nutrition and the quality of your water, more so your breathing is very important, because diet and water are very important. I don't want to take anything away from that. But I think in the culture and around the world at the moment, there is an emphasis on quality of food, quality of diet, which is fantastic, and we need to go there. But the next tier beyond the water is going to be the breathing, and it's starting to come out. So the sooner that you get the idea that this is really the main component that you have to control your physiology and get started on it, because it's a learning process. And no one goes from not knowing anything about it one day to exerting control over it the majority of any given day. It's a learning process, and it's very important, I think, for people to get started. And also that they feel the control that they have. They feel that power of controlling their own physiology instead of just being a victim of how they feel at any given time. And so we combine the breathing with nutrition and trying to get straight on other imbalances in their system so that the body comes up to speed. And now you take control over a good chunk of the physiological side of it by learning to control your breathing and essentially your nervous system. I hope you find this helpful. You can subscribe to our newsletter, masterthebody.com. We send out information, and we also send out updates on podcasts and or video. Again, this is Dr. Lauren Allison, masterthebody.com. Thanks for listening. Take care.